but I have to ask you, Chris, and I jest with this, but at the same time, have we ever really gotten out of this economy thanks to the Obama administration? Because it just seems like this boat is really just hitting the bottom of the bed, they slapping against the rocks, and we're all just looking for that big gaping hole to come through any moment. And was that a good assessment of where we are financially?
I think so. I mean, after the '08 Great Recession, it was basically met with, as far as a supposed remedy, with increased money supply, vastly increased money supply. It was met with significant bailouts of failed entities, and it was met with massive deficits by the federal government. And interestingly, each one of those measures is the exact opposite of what should be done in a recession. So certainly it didn't help the economy. It made it worse. It prolonged the inevitable. It may have kind of papered over it made things seem a little bit better for a period of time, but eventually things will come back to the way they were in '08, although I suspect next time it'll be worse, and that we'll have inflation at the same time.
Wow. Okay. For those, we're talking with Chris Casey, who is the managing director at WindRock Management investment firm out of Illinois. And let's get a great definition. What is the definition of inflation? And how do we know that it's happening in our daily lives?
You know, it's funny you say that because the government uses different metrics depending on when it suits its own needs. So traditionally, inflation, I know you're shocked, Ken, but traditionally, when people are talking about price inflation, an increase in prices over time, they're looking at the consumer price index for urban consumers, so the CPI-U, as it's frequently referenced. Now, alternatively, the federal government, or the Federal Reserve, I should say, when they're looking at things like GDP growth, so as the economy is expanding in nominal terms, so just basically the prices of goods and services are going up, they need to correct that and put it in real terms. So they want to look at its net of the effects of inflation. And curiously, when they do that, they don't use the CPI-U. They use what's called the personal consumption expenditures, so the PCE, which tends to lag and trail behind the CPI-U. So they're using by using a lower number, they're pretty much goosing the GDP figures that they're looking at. So, you know, certainly there's different ways to look at it. And interestingly, another interesting aspect of it is that they've changed the way they measure or calculate the various price indices over the years. And they've changed it significantly since the early 1980s. And if you use their numbers from back then, or the same procedures and methodologies they use, you'll suddenly see that we're not experiencing inflation of the supposed 1 or 2% per annum, but it's more like 5 or 6% at a minimum.
Wow. That's huge. Because you have, I know they like to take out the energy in terms of that and say, well, as a result of our productivity with energy, we're doing extremely well, and thus we're not experiencing the same level of inflation as we did back in the 1970s. But is that an aberration as well?
That energy should be taken out of certain indices, the way they're measuring it?
That if it were not for energy, that, you know, this is not, let me just rephrase it, that the economy is not as strong as people are saying it is. And if it were not for energy, Rick Santelli would have been yelling much louder yesterday. Oh,
okay. I see. For the GDP component, as far as you know, the fracking and whatnot, the energy component that's been strong over the last several years. Well, certainly it's helped economic growth overall, and so but I think that the problem with that is that people look at that particular industry, which has made tremendous strides over the last couple of years, but I think a a lot of people, including the Federal Reserve and some other government officials, hang their hat too much on the supposed effect of us becoming a net exporter of energy and viewing that as some kind of panacea for a whole bunch of problems that exist. And all you have to do is look at various countries across time and even today to understand that being a net exporter of energy or having a robust energy or cheap energy within your particular geographic boundaries does not instantly improve the economy. It's not a panacea. I mean, look at Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is not a tremendous economic power. They export a lot of oil. Great, but they don't do much else. So I think, while that's been great for the economy or certain sectors of the economy, too many people are looking at it as something that will really help bail out all these other terrible issues that we have.
Now, there's a question from Pundit Press in our chat room. And if it were not for consumer spending, would we have seen the 0.1% increase in the GDP figures?
Yeah, I should probably talk about GDP and from a more fundamental theoretical level. It's interesting. Okay. There's these various economic schools of thought. So there's the predominant one right now, which is Keynesianism. There's the Chicago School, which is a little bit more of a free market-oriented school of economics, although it certainly has some major flaws and does not embrace free markets in every fashion. And then there's the Austrian School, which I adhere to, and certainly the Austrian School advocates free markets in virtually every area of the economy. So, these various schools of thought, the Keynesians are actually the ones that developed the very concept of GDP. It was developed, about 80, 90 years ago. And so it is a Keynesian tool to measure the economy. And in fact, something very interesting that's come of light over the last 6 months is that we commonly hear about how consumer spending accounts for 70% of the economy, and therefore, because it's such a large component, the government needs to help, incentivize that segment of the economy in order to have the economy grow. And in fact, that's actually not the appropriate allocation of the economy that's devoted to consumer spending. It's more like 40%. And here's the reason why. When they look at GDP, what they try to measure is the economy in general, but they try to what they call avoid double counting. So they avoid, let's use a table as an example. To the extent someone buys a table, that's counted for an office or for a home or whatever. That's counted as part of GDP. But the wood that went into it and was sold to the manufacturer that was then passed on to the distributor, those intermediate stages are not counted. So there are vast segments of the economy that are excluded from GDP figures. For instance, steel. Steel is not included within GDP. And if you include these things, and what's interesting is the Bureau of Economic Analysis just started in the last, 6 months making these calculations, and they call it gross output versus gross product. When you look at gross output, what you find is that suddenly consumer spending drops from 70 to about 40% of its component of the GDP, and business spending, business investment goes up dramatically. So GDP, believe me, has some serious fundamental problems. It's a really, poor measure of how the economy is in general. I'd say there's probably 3 major problems, but the consumer spending aspect, that's kind of a big fallacy that's out there, I think needs to be addressed.
Wow. Learning a lot. All right. We're talking tonight with Chris Casey, and I'm going to tell you all, if you really have been listening to these media types who are on CNBC and the guy who presses a button and the cows moo and stuff like that, and you really haven't taken time to take a look at your investment and your portfolios and what the real economy is and how the rest of the world is going to react, you might want to take a moment to get in contact with Christopher Casey, who is a certified financial analyst, also a writer for the Austrian School of Economics with Ludwig von Mises Institute. And in a few moments, we're going to talk with the managing director about, the managing director of WindRock Financial. about deflation and its future impact on the U.S. of A. So I'm going to go back into the chat room. Let's put that back in there, and you can spread that around. Make certain that you all get in contact with Chris. You can do it with email. You can do it with a call. However you wish to do it. But our financial lives are being governed by a lot of people who are counting on our ignorance. And as long as we stay in the dark, they stay wealthy. We need to change that. So let's get to the issue of inflation versus deflation. Now, inflation we discern from the definition given is the additional costing of what it takes to get things into the marketplace per se. And some of those things are added as a result of regulation, some of those as a result of taxes, and just overall labor and other supply issues. Is there something that we should know about inflation when it comes to the Federal Reserve and when it comes to central markets around the world?
Yeah, I would say that the primary thing to know is that historically, inflation or deflation, all we're really talking about is the value of money, right? It's the value of money relative to goods and services within the economy. And when you put it in those terms, the value of money, all it is, like any commodity, like any good or service, is a function of its supply and demand. And because the Federal Reserve and banks, incidentally, through the fact that we have a fractional reserve banking system, because they're the only ones that can affect supply, they're the only culprits who can cause inflation. So anytime you hear about inflation being caused by, I don't know, greedy businessmen or some type of exports or imports that are occurring, that has, if anything, a very minor indirect effect upon the price level. Inflation or deflation is Milton Friedman said, everywhere, always and everywhere, I think a monetary phenomena is what he said, but it's primarily caused by the central banks, and as much as they talk about protecting the price level or being charged with having a stable price level, they're the only ones that can do otherwise. So the primary takeaway is that it's the central banks that are the culprits here. And the more they talk about deflation, yeah, go ahead.
But wait a minute, Chris, hold up. And I want to go back to the 1%ers. Yeah, I'm up with 1%ers here. Just joking. But are you trying to tell me that the greedy capitalists who are at Exxon and AT&T and Google and Facebook, that those evil capitalists causing my rates to increase and not causing my more money to come out of my pocket for the fees that they charge for the services that they render? Is that what you're telling me?
I am. I mean, any business, any person for that matter, when you look at themselves as wanting higher wage rates, but any business always wants to charge higher prices, right? They not only do they want to out of perhaps any kind of greed, but they have an obligation to their shareholders to maximize profits. So they want to. But the thing is that although that's used as a scapegoat in any given time, when we have inflation, and when we do, I guarantee you'll have plenty of politicians blaming businesses or other supposed villains. They ignore the fact that there's no reason to think that businesses became more greedy in any given particular time. Businesses are always looking to increase prices, and price levels go up and down, and they've changed dramatically over years, and it in no way correlates with the supposed greed of businessmen. So to the extent that they wish to increase prices, yes, but they always do. That doesn't change through time, but inflation and deflation do change over time.
Okay, and so in this regard, regarding deflation, which we have a lot of individuals who are greatly concerned with it, and I just want to play a clip for you real quick. This is Jim Rogers, and he's talking about deflation that will lead to an economic collapse And I want to come back to you to talk about that.
It will not have much effect on the economy. It will have an effect on the financial markets, and therefore indirectly on the economy. What will happen is they will taper, they'll do some more. Eventually the markets will get scared, they will go down all over the world, and then the bureaucrats and the academics at the Fed will panic, and they'll start printing money again, and everybody will say, phew, it's okay.
Will it be okay, though?
No, Sharon G., it's a disaster for the world. It's an unmitigated disaster. This is the first time in world history, recorded history, that all the major central banks in the world are printing staggering amounts of money at the same time. There's an artificial sea of liquidity out. Look out the window. You'll see the ocean of liquidity rising, rising, rising. This is going to be a disaster in the end.
But already we saw it happen to some degree. They've started the tapering, and actually the impact hasn't been as horrendous as expected. We saw emerging economies obviously falling drastically in May earlier this year. How do you see emerging economies faring in light of the tapering? Don't you think they'd be a little bit more prepared this time around?
The financial market, yeah, I'm trying to differentiate between the financial markets and the world economy. The world economy has not been doing terribly well. The financial markets have been doing well, but recently, when they cut back last week, they said the financial markets, in emerging markets, started going down. It was in the developed markets that they started going up because people sighed a relief and said, oh my gosh, it's only 10 billion. So we still have 65 billion every month. That's okay. But eventually, Sharon G., let me repeat, it's going to go back down. Either they're going to do it, which is unlikely because they'll panic, or the market is going to force them to stop. And when that happens, Sharon G., the world's going, it may not be till 2015, 2016, I don't know, but this cannot go on.
We're talking tonight with Chris Casey, who's the managing director at WindRock Management, an investment firm in Illinois. Jim Rogers is talking about a worldwide economic collapse, and it's built on the foundation of what Janet Yellen and the rest of the Federal Reserve are doing. What exactly is occurring in this situation to make people this fearful of what they're doing?
Yeah, and I should start off with saying that I have nothing but the highest respect for Jim Rogers, and pretty much everything he said there I completely agree with. And for any of your listeners who may not know who he is, he's a well-known, investor or financial guru that goes back a number of years, and he's written some great books. And pretty much anytime you can listen to him on TV, it's worthwhile. As far as what he's referencing in particular, it's this massive printing of money that's been done in really the whole developed world. It's China, Japan, the U.S., and Europe. And why that's a problem and why he's referencing that's going to be just a complete disaster is that is actually the cause of business cycles. It's the cause of recessions. And a lot of people don't know that because the media doesn't report that. It's not universally agreed upon. But if you look throughout history, anytime we've had a recession or a depression, just meaning a deeper recession, it's always preceded by a significant increase in the money supply. And the reason that causes this economic calamity down the road is that when you increase the money supply, you distort the nature and the level of interest rates. And by lowering interest rates, all of a sudden businesses go out and they make a bunch of investments that they would not have otherwise done. They've malinvested this cash. And when they do that, eventually, once the real interest rates reassert themselves, so once the interest rates that are determined by the supply and demand for savings, once they reassert themselves, determine that, hey, these malinvestments didn't make any sense, and you have a recession. A recession is when these investments are liquidated, they're put into more productive hands. And so what he's referencing is absolutely right. We've had the printing of money that's been unprecedented over the last 4 or 5 years throughout the developed world. We've never seen anything like this, but anytime we've seen anything similar to it, but on a smaller scale, it's resulted in disasters. So we're looking at some really tough times ahead, I think.
Now, that's not what our government is telling us, and certainly not what Janet Yellen said. Well, at least the Federal Reserve is saying, which is why they are cutting back on or tapering the Q3 processes they're in, quantitative easing. Can you discuss that matter with us just quickly? What what the Federal Reserve's decision to cut back is doing with the financial markets right now?
Yeah, it's funny the way the financial markets react to for any given economic news is always in some ways a flip of the coin, right? Sometimes bad news is good because they'll think they'll keep doing something, whereas good news can be interpreted as bad. So it's kind of a mixed bag. Right now, she's certainly reducing the amount of money that's being injected into the system. As of yesterday, it's been reduced on a monthly basis to $45 billion a month. But it should be remembered that $45 billion a month is over and above their typical open market operations that increase the money supply. So we're talking about an extraordinary measure that's being reduced, not eliminated, not cut back, not reversed, but reduced, and that's all we're talking about. So all things being equal, the stock market has not done that well this year. I think the S&P 500 is up maybe 2% year to date. It had a pretty large sell-off in late January, early February. So I think in general the markets would prefer to see additional liquidity, meaning a postponement of the tapering. But I suspect that sooner rather than later we're either going to enter into significant economic turmoil or market volatility where the Federal Reserve will either end the tapering, if not reverse it. And I can't say when that will happen, maybe later this year, maybe early next year. But I think eventually they'll have to go right back to their old playbook of massive money printing, larger deficits, and as well as bailouts.
Yeah, I'm a predictor of September, right before the election. We're talking tonight with Chris Casey, who is the managing director of WindRock Management. Ladies and gentlemen, it just makes good sense to have someone who has a great understanding of what the economy is doing and also what the financial markets are doing, and to give you reason for the investments that you make. So I would recommend highly that you get in contact with Christopher Casey, managing director, and I put in the chat room, WindRockWealth.com. The management team, you'll see his pretty little face, Christopher Casey there. You get in contact with him about your financial portfolio. In your writing, with inflation, the deflation myth, you state that examining any recessionary period subsequent to the Great Depression will lead one to this conclusion. The conclusion is that profits are unaffected by deflation or inflation. Is that true?
Well, first of all, I think you said you put my picture in the chat room. I don't know if that's going to do me any favors. So, if you want to take that out, that'd be fine with me. But yeah, the phrase you're referencing, I believe, it's interesting. The Federal Reserve, a couple Federal Reserve economists, I think about in early, it was probably 2004 maybe, came out with a paper where they went ahead and examined all the recessions across different countries that we've had over the last, I think, 100 years. I think it was a 100-year span. And they said, listen, although deflation is commonly caused or commonly blamed as a cause of recessions or depressions, we find no statistical evidence that that's the case. In fact, we find the opposite. So if you look at what's occurred since the Great Depression in the U.S., yes, we've had plenty of recessions, but they've been of an inflationary variety. So we've had rising prices during a recession, which, as an aside, according to Keynesian economics, is impossible. But that doesn't stop them from continuing preaching their religion. But
exactly.
So it's interesting that should not be able to happen under their model. I just think it goes to show that deflation is not the cause of recessions. It's not something to be feared as such. As far as profits go, I hear this a lot too about inflation. They say, well, we need inflation so businesses can raise their prices. But profits are always a function of price, of revenue and costs, and both are prices, right? It's a price of something to a cost is a price. It's simply a different kind of price. It's the price of an input. And so there's no reason to think that revenues or costs would rise more or less relative to each other if all prices are rising. So in an inflationary or deflationary environment, profit margins, all things being equal, should not be affected.
So what should affect profits in this regard? Would it be deflation overall?
I'm sorry. What would affect profits in general? Would
deflation impact profits that are made by a corporation?
I don't think so when you look at it in real terms. So certainly the prices they're charging or the prices they're able to command on the marketplace for their goods or service are decreasing. But at the same time, their costs are falling. So their profits, in that sense, their profit margins are unaffected. So will the profits in absolute terms be reduced? Yes, they'll be making less money. But the fact is, in inflation, when you have falling prices, the money they've made, the purchasing power is greater than it would have otherwise been. So all things being equal, their profits as measured in real terms, as measured by what they can buy or sell in the marketplace, should be unaffected.
Now, in terms of the central bankers here, who have gathered their great reasoning as to why we have to liquidate the world with excessive currency, inquiry here, we are all under the knowledge that this overproduction of greenbacks is definitely going to lead us to a road of destruction long term. We're now under the understanding that neither inflation nor deflation is going to seriously impact the economy as greatly as the overproduction of money. Can you explain to us exactly why we should be overly concerned with the amount of supply of greenbacks in our economy?
Well, it certainly is something to be concerned about. If inflation is simply a function of the supply and demand for money, which I think it is, so all things being equal, if you have a higher demand for a product, its value goes up, right? So if the value of money goes up, the price of goods and services go down. If the supply of money goes up, you have the reverse. The value or the prices of goods and services go up relative to money. So that certainly is a major concern. And if you look historically, how bad it can get, in the 70s, we had inflation of out of nowhere, 9% in 73, 12% in 74, 13% capping out the decade in 79. So it can come on suddenly. It's devastating. I think it's especially devastating to lower income or middle income people because, frankly, those are the people that are spending more of their money on consumption. Rich people only have so much that they need to spend on food and shelter, et cetera. So it's especially devastating to that demographic.
So really the game that's being played right now really makes people who have 401ks happy and satisfied. As worker bees, they are getting something towards the future because the financial markets are reacting in a positive nature. It makes the bankers a little bit more wealthy. Corporations take their profits from stock market gains. But the poor person, in the end, is going to fall by the wayside. And you mentioned consumption. What is the definition of consumption? What are the things that make up consumption overall? And how is this adversely impacting them again?
Well, I'm trying to think. There's a couple things you touched on there. Certainly inflation is definitely going to be having a disproportionate impact upon lower and middle income people. And I think you're right. Everyone right now, you're talking about the worker bees that have 401ks that are going up because the stock market has had nice performance over the last couple of years. they are feeling good, and the Federal Reserve feels like they've accomplished something because but all they've done is put off the inevitable. And when that hits, as far as a recession, as far as inflation, it's going to be a delayed impact, but it's going to be staggering.
Now, what would be the catastrophe there? What happens when the world recognizes that all of the printed currency will do them no good? What happens to the state of affairs for the country and for the individual citizen here, especially those who are poor?
Yeah, it's going to be devastating. I think. Now, this may not happen, although I think it's more likely than not that we're going to see significant inflation down the road. But inflation has a number of different effects. It's not just that things cost more. That's perhaps the most important one. But inflation, a couple other things are going on. One, and this is a particular unique insight to the Austrian School of Economics, is that there's a wealth transfer effect that's commonly not talked about. Now, as you increase the money supply, you've cheapened the currency, right? So you've made it worth less, all things being equal. But it doesn't happen right away. It happens over time. And so the people that get the money first essentially benefit relative to those who get the money last. So Wall Street and all the bankers that feed off this cheap money, they're the ones that benefit from a wealth transfer effect relative to people down the road when the money gets to them, when the inflation impact shows up in prices. So there's another aspect of inflation that's commonly not mentioned. If things get bad enough, inflation does indeed have, and I do believe that the increase of the money supply does cause recession. So I'm talking about the increase in the price level apart from that. But there's some real problems as far as businesses are concerned. I mean, I don't know how old you are, Ken, but I'm in my I'm just old enough to remember that I was a kid in the 70s, and I'm a CPA, so I remember this from studying years later. But it can have very profound impact upon accounting. And accounting, you think about it, it sounds fairly mundane. It sounds boring. It is the backbone of business. So you think about it, when we had a barter economy, thousands of years ago, any household or business, you start the year off with 5 chickens and a couple tables and bales of hay, and you end the year with a cow and a couple pigs, and you don't know if you did better, right? There's no way to gauge that. It's only through having money and by a monetary system that you have profit and loss. And when you have inflation, you seriously distort the concept of profits, and you don't really know exactly how you're doing. And that's why in the late 70s, the Financial Advisory, I'm sorry, I'm butchering this, but the FASB that was charged with having various accounting pronouncements came up with some proposed regulations for inflation accounting. How can businesses actually report their numbers in this kind of age of an unstable currency? So there's a lot of problems with inflation apart from that of just simply rising prices.
Wow. Chris, I thank you so much for coming on with us tonight. You do a great deal of work. First and foremost, congratulations on the tax season. Hopefully you got some rest. Secondly, in terms of working with individuals on their financial futures, and you and I both agree that do you believe that the gold standard should be brought back in terms of the U.S.?
Well, let me just caveat my answer slightly in saying that I'm not a gold standard advocate per se. I'm an advocate of the free market determining what money should be. But having said that, historically, obviously, gold is the natural choice. So de facto, yes. But I would just caveat by saying, get it out of the hands of central bankers. They have no way of knowing how much money should be in a system, just as they wouldn't know how many bananas should be in the system. It really should be the free market that determines that.
Exactly. You are free market. You believe in making certain that individuals at least look at variant marketplaces that are going on simultaneously in our culture, and that's just the Austrian effect. How can people get in contact with you and get the 411 on their portfolios and how to actually manage their financial success in the years to come when we have the pure expectation of catastrophic risk?
Sure. I mean, we're always happy to speak with people. But I think the first the springboard would be just to visit our website, and we have all of our contact information on there. But more importantly, we have a lot of content that just talks about what we see coming down the pike as far as the economy and ways to protect yourself and help yourself and your family. And so that website is www.windrockwealth.com. There's a particular section I'm referencing, which is just, you'll see it's our research and analysis section. And I would encourage people just to start there. And to the extent they want to have a conversation or contact us, they can certainly readily find us from the website.
I most definitely encourage everyone to do that, in fact. And for Underground Professor, first and foremost, gold standard. Number 2, pick up the phone and call Chris Casey tomorrow morning for the $2 that you have to invest. Chris, thank you so much for coming on the air tonight and talking with us and guiding us through the ideas of deflation, inflation, and looking at the catastrophe that's ahead of us as a result of the egregious overproduction of money rather than actual success of the economy.
Ken, thank you. I'm always happy to come on, and I greatly enjoyed it.
I'm looking forward to it next time.